Last week we talked about verse 1 of Romans chapter 12, as we are to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, how we need to give gratitude to Him. But in those two verses, verses 1 and 2, there is so much packed into those two verses. So we're going to continue on with the next part. As it says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good and pleasing and perfect will. So we are a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Here's God's expectation as a living sacrifice. That is, be transformed. Be transformed. And how? By renewing of your mind. Our lives are to be changed as our minds are renewed, by renewing of our minds. And so what does that look like? What does renewing of our minds look like then? John chapter 15 shows us what that really looks like. This is the word of Jesus. I am the true vine, and my Father is a gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in His love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. Everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. The fruit bears when remained. Fruit bears when remained. The fruit is the power of remaining. The fruit of renewing of our minds is the transformation. When we remain in Christ, who is the vine? Christ. Then we become branches of Christ. Our minds no longer reflect the world, but reflect Christ. And when we reflect Christ in our minds, then the fruit that we bear will reflect the vine that we belong to, which is the character and the ministry of Jesus Christ. And by remaining in Him, He remains in us. I mean, that sounds good, right? And an idea of remaining, I mean, those who are the gardeners and those who grow tomatoes and any kind of fruits and the vegetables really know better about this than I am. It has to be connected. In order to bear the fruit, the branches have to be connected, and if it's not connected, then it does no good. I mean, that's pretty common understanding. And that applies in our spiritual growth, spiritual life. There is a source of our love. There's a source of our strength. There's a source that we grow with. And what is that source? Now, here is what is not remaining in Him. Remaining in Him is not about forcibly changing our behaviors. Just changing our outward behaviors does not change who we really are. Of course, if the behaviors are destructive to the self or to the others, they must stop. Yeah. Hurting behaviors to the self or others, they must stop. But just stopping or changing or manipulating our behaviors does not really reflect the changes of heart. We are the branches, and the branch is the result of the vine that it belongs to. I mean, putting apple branches to the grapevine, you're still not going to get apples, right? It's not going to happen. Putting a different branch to the different vine or the tree is not going to get you the fruit that you desire. Apples can only come from the branches that are connected to the apple trees. When the heart changes happen, the outward behaviors and expressions will reflect the change of heart. But just because the behavior is changed or manipulated does not necessarily mean the change of heart. So then what is then remaining Him is like? This passage, John chapter 15, paints a clear picture of what our practices of being remained in Him really looks like. The first one is this: the life of prayer. Life of prayer. And the life of prayer is not just asking, but also seeing the answers. Yeah. Verse 7 and 8. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. What does it say about praying? Ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. That's a prayer. The prayer that is answered. There is that power of remaining. You pray, and He answers. And since you experience Him answering your prayers, what do you think? We keep praying even more. Pray more, and then more answers come. That's intimate communion with Jesus Christ. Remain in Him and his words remain in you. It's really like going back and forth with God. God, here it is. Okay, I give you right back to you. Intimate relationship, intimate communion, continuous giving, receiving with God. That's what the life of prayer is like when remaining in Him. Now, let's not misunderstand what it says, ask whatever you wish, though. Because the preface of asking whatever you wish is, if you remain in Him and His words remain in you. Think about that. You are in tune with God's words and so in tune with God's heart. So your heart will be asking after what He would already desire here on earth as it is in heaven. When remaining in Him, our prayer life changes to the kingdom-focused prayers and His will-driven. That's the powerful prayer life with answers that bring glory to the Father. Remain in Him and pray. So the first thing for life of prayer. Now the second display of power of remaining is the life of obedience. Life of obedience, because we want to do what He wants us to do. We want to do what He wants to do. He wants to see it happen here. We're being fed the desires of Jesus, and our actions reflect Jesus. Verse 9, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in His love. Now, in order to obey, you got to know what it says. There has to be knowledge of what is expected, what is required of. It's hard to follow what you don't know. This is important because when the Israelites in the Old Testament turned away from God, God pointed out that they were being destroyed because of lack of knowledge. They have forsaken the law. They ignored listening to the law, listening to God's holiness, so they went on with their own ways. It's not that God's commands were not available to them, but instead, God's commands were just ignored. People just didn't pay attention. Now, have you ever broken the law because you didn't know it? Now, more people probably can relate to this. You are driving, road seems very clear, so you press the pedal a little harder, knowingly, not knowingly, I'm not going to get into that. And before you realize you're going too fast, and what follows is the blue light. And you are asked why you're stopped, and he tells you that you are going 60 miles per hour with the speed limit of 40. Uh-oh. And then you thought the speed limit was 50, but you missed a sign. You missed a sign, whatever you are doing. So next time you drive the same road, it's the same road. Now what do? You try to pay attention and see, there it is. There's a sign that you just missed. It's not that you wanted to break the law, right? You just didn't know the law. Lack of knowledge. I saw a blue light flashing this morning. It wasn't me. I wonder if he knew. But the thing is, when we don't know, it's hard to follow. Imagine when we are connected, when we remain in Him, the truth of God's words, the holiness of who He is, are fed into us. Because we get all of the bread, all of the vine, right? What the vine has to offer, the branches just soak in it. His truth, His character of holiness are fed into us. We become aware of God's truth and God's laws. We become familiar with what He loves and what He hates, because we are continuously being fed of the Word of God and constantly ask and receive through prayers. But not only the knowledge. See, there is this desire to obey, because you know that it is better to remain than being apart. Better to remain than being apart. You recognize that there is life and nurturing through remaining in Him. So there is this desire to obey. So the life of prayer and life of obedience. Now the third display, power of remaining, is the life of loving one another. Loving one another is the core of who God is. As at the core of His relationship with His people is His love for them. Without love, we miss the point. As He said, my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. See, our spiritual life begins with the love of God. In other words, we are going as branches from the vine. We're growing as branches from the vine as the love of God is feeding us to grow. See, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And that's what Jesus did for us. He laid His life down to rescue us from death and sin, canceling the penalty of sins and giving us the power of life. And remaining in Him enables us to love one another as Christ loved. Remaining in Him enables us to love others as Christ loved us. I mean, let's acknowledge our weaknesses, okay? It's hard to love. It's impossible to love others like Christ did. But that's what God desires for His people. Our love is weak. We saw it a few weeks ago. Peter confessed to Jesus, you know that I love you with brotherly love. When Jesus asked, agape love. That really reflects who we are. Our love is weak. But He still wanted Peter to follow Him, just as He calls us to follow. Remain in Him so that we can feed His sheep, caring and tendering God's people. That's our call. our call is to care and to nurture and feed the people of God, the ones that God so cherishes. Even though our love is weak, He wants us. He called us. And when we remain in Him, that's when it becomes possible. Christ's love through us. Christ's love through us. Love one another. That's the power of remaining. Genuine, outrageous, the perfect kind of love. Fully devoted, love which never fails. Loving others like Christ loved. So be transformed by renewing of minds. That is to remain in Him. Remain in Him. And the power of remaining is displayed with the life of prayer. Prayer that brings the answers. With the life of obedience. Knowing what He loves and what He hates. Knowing His commands and desiring to do. And with the life of love. Not a human kind of love, but the love as Christ loved His people. Because we're being sourced by Christ Himself. Christ Himself nurturing us, feeding us, so that what comes out of our life is Christ Himself. That's what it calls for. Will you remain in Him? You know, one of the heroes of faith to me is Daniel in the Old Testament. He lived during the time when living out his faith was greatly challenging. It was a time under the captivity of Babylon. But even during the captivity, his life shows that he remained with God. And he remained with God with the life of prayer. Daniel chapter 6 shows that how he prayed 3 times a day as always. As always. That brought the result of being thrown into the lion's den. But that didn't matter. Challenges didn't matter. He remained with God. And as he prayed, he received the answers. He received the numerous answers here and there. And then with the life of obedience, as in Daniel chapter 1, when everyone was being fed of the royal food from the royal palace that probably had the idols worship all over it, Daniel and his friends refused to take. It was the determination, desire to obey and to be true to who God was. And even through all the challenges and the persecutions he had faced, accused of doing, all he was doing was honoring God, but as we know, he was thrown into the lion's den, and his friends were thrown into the fiery furnace. There's no bitterness, no hatred. He wasn't even bringing any judgment against anybody. He was just happy to be with the Lord. There is power of remaining. Power. As we celebrate Mother's Day today, we know how important it is to remain. Right? as the baby grows from the mother's womb, the baby remains with the mother. Baby remains with the mother. That's how life grows. That's how the life grows. Simply by remaining. The baby is fed through the body of mother simply by remaining. We, as the children of God, our spiritual life grows when we remain in Him. It's not a manipulation of our outward behaviors or expression. By remaining in Him, we are renewed. Our minds are renewed, and our lives are transformed. And the secret is simple. Simply remain. There is power of remaining in Him. But apart from Him, we are weak. Apart from Him, we are lost. Apart from Him, we are powerless. So would you remain? Remain in Him. There is power.